Good morning and welcome to Beyond Recruitment, Cultivating and Retaining Diverse Talent in National Security. Now, please welcome INSA Vice President of Policy, Bishop Garrison.
Good morning and a warm welcome to you all. We're delighted to have you with us for this engaging panel discussion. A special thanks to Black professionals in international affairs for being fantastic partners. Working with Alexandria and her team has been an absolute delight, and we are very eager and anticipate more collaborations in the future and coming years. Our panelists bring diverse perspectives from the international community, from the intelligence community, and this is going to promise to be an absolutely insightful and dynamic discussion. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, and we hope you do, please submit them through the questions box on the right of your screen. We will do our best to engage and answer all of your questions. And we're pleased to welcome members of the press to this call today. This is just a reminder that this program is on the record. It's being recorded and will be posted on the INSA website later this week. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, a longstanding friend of both INSA and a personal friend and colleague of my own, Mr. Charles Carruthers, principal with Cornerstone. Charles, over to you.
Bishop, thank you again, and welcome again to our very necessary and timely discussion on Beyond Recruitment, Cultivating and Retaining Diverse Talent in National Security. I'm Charles Carruthers, Chairman of the BPIA Leadership Advisory Council and Principal at Cornerstone Government Affairs. As we all know, it's a challenge to retain diverse talent in the United States intelligence community. Today, we have a rich panel of deep well of knowledge, and we're going to try to unpackage this and touch upon a few topics. Retaining people of color at the mid to senior ranks, have a candid conversation on diversity in national security, what it's like to recruit and cultivating diverse talent, pitfalls in our systems and culture, and best diversity and inclusion practices. I would now love to introduce our amazing panel, Mr. Sean Coates, Chief of Staff for Human Resource Management at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Dr. Todd Creekmore, Senior Cybersecurity Engineer at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Dr. Teresa Horn, Director of the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity at DISA, and Kathy Suber, the now recently retired Democratic Budget Director at the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Welcome, everybody. Dr. Horn, I want to kick things off with you. What strategies or initiatives have proven successful in retaining people of color at the mid to senior ranks, particularly at that real sweet spot, the GS 13 and 14 levels and above?
Yeah, well, first off, let me say thank you, Charles, for inviting me here, as well as BPIA and INSA for doing this, especially during Black History Month. I think this is a great conversation that needs to be had, not only this month, but all the time, right? Because if we don't highlight these issues, we continue to make the same mistakes. And so the first thing that I would say in terms of strategies, there's three that I would bring up that I think our leaders truly are finding a way to understand. One of those being well talked about over COVID, which is maximum telework and remote work, right? I think that's one of the ways that we have proven that we can retain people of color because of mental health issues that we particularly go through because of microaggressions that happen in the workplace, discrimination that happen in the workplace. And so having that sort of benefit to the workforce really changes the way we see things, right? So that's one of those. I would say maximum telework and remote work really reduces that exposure to microaggressions and toxic work environments and feelings of code switching for those that are in higher level meetings. So when we're talking about that 13 to 14 and above, you start getting into different types of meetings that you're probably the only one there, right? And so code switching and imposter syndrome is another thing that we particularly have to deal with. And so the second thing that I would say is that having more people of color at the higher ranks itself, right, helps people of color at that 13 and 14 rank because they see it can be done, right? The worst place to be is the first of something, okay? It's a lonely, cold place that's full of imposter syndrome and microaggressions. And so those 13 and 14s will see that they have mentors at those higher levels. They have people they can reach out to tell them what's going on at their level that they can get guidance from. And so the biggest part of that, though, is that they have sponsors that can now open that door for them to get into upper management roles. And so the sheer fact of hiring people of color into leadership roles means that you will have more people in that talent pool willing to bet their career on your agency because there's a pathway now. They can see it and they can strive for it. And so that strategy, I think, is really simple: to be serious about where you recruit and who you reach out to and who you interview. And if you don't have any candidates of color as a hiring official, that you might want to start asking questions about your recruitment team, right? And if they're only using USA Jobs, then you're likely only getting the ones that know how to cheat the system. So we won't even go into the USA Jobs conversation right now. But the third and final thing that I'll say is inclusive culture, right? You can hire people on all day. You can have a cadre of diverse pools of candidates, right? But if you bring those people on into a toxic culture, you will lose them in the first 3 years. And now you've wasted time and money. And people also know that you are not really trying to bring on diverse professionals. And so that looks like ERGs, recognition, ensuring fair systems, opportunities to promote, right? And those opportunities to promote should be based on merit, not relationships, because we can go down a whole conversation about how relationship-based promotions are not helpful for those in the Black community. So with that, I'll stop there and allow the other panelists to share as well.
Thank you for that, Dr. Horn. USA Jobs can have its very own webinar, often referred to as the black hole of resumes. Dr. Creekmore, I want you to come in here. Please provide your candid thoughts as well.
Well, first, thank you all for having me. For myself, I think, the biggest thing, especially for the IC, is that we identify that we have a problem. The ODNI recently published their demographic reports in 2022. And I think that is the first thing, is figuring out what our problem is. And so we've started to really look at the way we collect data and new ways of collecting data to really identify, okay, we have minority candidates coming in, but why are they only staying within less than a year, right? And so now you have to start looking at your hiring practice. And then when we're hiring these people, why is it that the numbers are so less when we hire them at the senior ranks, which is GS 13 and above? So now you have to start to look at, what do those panels look like? What are those questions looking like? And like you said, what are USA Jobs look like? And the next thing is, we've identified that we need better partnerships with HBCUs, better partnerships as far as how do we do our contracting with our broad agency announcements and give people those opportunities to see what we're doing, to give people access to our problems, and allow people in. A lot of times HBCUs, especially in my research area, don't have SCIFs. They don't have people with clearances. So those students aren't made aware of what's possible to them, what kind of problems we have, and how they can kind of attach themselves to our problems. And even when we think of people with disabilities, it's the accessibility in a lot of our buildings. Do we have the software to accommodate people? Do we have even just the basic systems as far as our doors, right? Is it easy for them to come through our doors? Is it easy for them to get access to elevators? So the accessibility of that. And then the deaf and hard of hearing, do we have those interpreters that are clear, that are willing to come into the community to make sure that they can help those that are deaf and hard of hearing in different meetings or conferences that we have when people are engaging? And I think last is just training. How do we implement a lot of training in a lot of the activities that we constantly do every day, so that we are aware that when we're in a meeting, we're making sure that we're getting everyone's viewpoint, and not just the people that just look like us, or the people that's just from the same place as where we are. So I think the biggest thing that's happening now is, we know that there is a problem. We've identified that there is a problem, and now we're actually trying to dissect what that problem is by looking at different data points.
Thank you for that, Dr. Horn and Dr. Creekmore. Sean, you have a really unique role as a Chief of Staff for Human Resource Management at ODNI. I was wondering if you could share some specific lessons learned from failures in retaining diverse talent, and let's unpackage how those lessons have been applied to improve future efforts.
Sure, Charles, thank you for the question, and also thank you for the invitation to serve on this amazing panel. Some of the high-level failures that I've seen in terms of retaining a diverse population or people of color, the lack of cross-community mentoring programs, the lack of effective advocacy, the absence of exit interviews or an ineffective exit interview process, and really a lack of sponsorship. But I have several lessons learned that I've observed over my career. One, most individuals, they aren't leaving the job or the organization. They love working at the organization, but they're fleeing from an awful manager or an awful leadership team. Another lesson learned, broadening opportunities and advancement opportunities should be plentiful within our respective organizations. If not, officers will enable their own mobility by gaining experiences down on Capitol Hill or in the private sector, and hopefully returning to the government side one day. When I look at the career trajectories of some of our amazing senior leaders and trailblazers, such as the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Dr. Stacey Dixon, whose career trajectory includes stops at CIA, NRO, HIPC, NGA, and ODNI, it shows the value of broadening opportunities and mobility. Also, we must continuously reassess our value proposition. Times have changed, competition for talent is intense. What else can we offer within our constraints to enhance the experience for all officers, but especially officers of color? And I often brainstorm with colleagues on this topic. A few things, we need to offer more and expand our existing comprehensive training, professional development, and academic opportunities, mentoring and coaching programs in the IC. We need to continue to advocate on the Hill for the elimination or reduction of the GS-15 pay cap. For example, at the GS-15 level, steps 7 through 10 are maxed out salary-wise around $192, and a GS-15 step 10 should be getting paid around $213,000 a year, and that's a $21,000 difference. Sponsorship and advocacy by all officers needs to increase. And this issue isn't going to be solved by people of color alone. It's going to take advocates and leaders from across the enterprise to engage and demand accountability and results, and devise creative solutions to address this most urgent issue. Something else, and I have the pleasure of serving as one of the co-chairs of ODNI's African American Employee Resource Group. A lot of folks complain about burnout. I fought the good fight for the last 20 years or 30 years. How do we ensure our DEIA advocates remain resilient and also manage burnout at the same time? And at a recent HBCU presidential forum within the IC, the vast majority of presidents asked the IC, why should I send my students to your organizations? And ever since the unfortunate George Floyd incident, the interest in competition for diverse talent has skyrocketed. And numerous private and public entities are in fierce competition for diverse talent. Our value proposition must be strong and relevant, and we must continue to cultivate an IC where people of color will thrive while having a nurturing work environment.
Sean, thank you for that. And I want to stick with you because you mentioned mentoring twice, and that's so important. Very briefly, how important is mentoring? Any tips on helping to find mentors for oneself? And I want Kathy to jump in after this as well, because I know she's had some great mentors throughout the years.
I think mentoring is highly important. I feel I'm here today because I'm standing on the shoulders of some of my phenomenal mentors. Shirley Massingale, George Farmer, the late great Sonia Holt, just to name a few. And mentoring has provided opportunities for me to cross from one IC agency to another. It's been a source of, almost a family. And whenever I've run into any career obstacles or challenges or needed to run something past someone. And the newer generation, I can't believe I've been in the IC now for 20 years, but the newer generation, they expect it, they need it. And if we want to retain them for hopefully a 30-year plus career, I mean, it's pivotal, especially not just within your particular agency, but across the IC enterprise.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Sean. Kathy, I want to get your candid thoughts on the importance of mentoring as well.
And so Sean has already touched on so many critical elements that we need to pay attention to. But for sure, mentorship is vital to the growth of leadership and inclusion of officers from diverse backgrounds across the IC. In addition to mentorship, there should be sponsorship. A lot of the positions that I applied for, or a lot of the positions that I held, I had no thought of even approaching or applying for, but persons reached out to me to say, hey, I really think you should do this. In fact, some of the better job opportunities that I had, or the most rewarding, were from people tapping me on the shoulder, to include Shirley Massingale, as Sean has mentioned. And there've been others too, like Brenda McKinley is the person who said, hey, I want you to apply for this joint duty down at OMB. Was nowhere in my thought process. I was mainly in the halls on Route 123. So be open, number one, to other opportunities that are a stretch for you. But be mindful that if someone has tapped you, it's because they see something that maybe you don't see. So mentorship is key. But the other thing, though, I think we need to be mindful of is that now our workforce may stay for 5 to 10, and if we're lucky, 15, vice to the 20 to 30. So who then will be sharing that brain trust? Who's making sure that people understand how the mission works? The other thing that I'm hoping that will be provided via mentorship would be looking at opportunities in core mission. If we're not in core mission, we're not going to advance to the top of the organization. The other thing that's important is to encourage our officers not to continue to take lateral positions or the fix-it jobs. That's unfortunately what continues to happen to persons from diverse backgrounds once they hit the 14, 15 SIS or senior leadership levels. So mentorship, sponsorship remain critical to our growth. We have to do more to ensure that our organizations also understand how a type A person from a diverse background work, or what they respond to, or what's a turn on. So I've touched on a couple of areas, but I think it's not just grabbing somebody and saying, hey, I want to make sure I keep in touch with you. Of course, very important, but there are layers upon that you have to touch on and grow. And that's only done through continuously working with the person or putting them in touch with persons to get that required growth.
Thank you for that, Kathy.
Charles, can I add in on this one really quick? I just wanted to add another component to that, because I think we've touched on two very important ones, which is mentorship and sponsorship. But the way I view it in this sort of trifecta, right? Where you have mentorship, where you first develop a relationship with someone, and it's more around building and understanding around, who you are in this space if you're new in it. But then that second one that it should go to would be coaching, right? So once you have the relationship, coaching is that next step, because now you're helping the person do something new or do it at another level, and they have you there to guide them, help them with that. And then sponsorship is that last piece, right? Which is, now that I know I know who you are, your core values, and who you are as a person through mentorship. I know that you can do it because I've walked you through it and helped you. Now I can open up the door for you. The sponsorship piece is, I can vouch for you now, right? And so that's why it's so important that we think of it in that line of how we build our relationships with young Black professionals who are willing and ready to move up the ranks. Now, that doesn't mean everybody is willing and ready, right? Just because they're Black. There's criteria that falls into that, which is why that mentorship piece is so important. You'll know the person that they are and whether they're ready for that next step. And then they allow you to show that through coaching. And then the sponsorship is where you put your name on the line to open the door for them. So I think that's an important distinction that we need to definitely have, is that it's a flow of the relationship to use all of those pieces.
Thank you for that, Dr. Horn. And Dr. Horn, I'm going to stick with you, and I want to bring Dr. Creekmore in here to talk about barriers. But before we do, we have close to 160 virtual attendees. Feel free to type your questions for the virtual attendees into the question box, and we'll get to them in about 19 or 20 minutes or so. So I want to make sure that your voices are heard as well. So Dr. Horn, let's stick with you. Talk about barriers. Your perspective, what barriers exist for people of color to reach the senior ranks, and what measures have you seen that have been effective in overcoming those barriers?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many barriers. I think one of the main ones that I've seen at many of the agencies, when I think about trends that I'm seeing across agencies that I've worked or that I have peers working, and we discuss different issues like these on a regular basis. I think in terms of people of color moving into senior ranks, right, we're really looking at one of the barriers being the known talent pool, right? And that's people hire who they know, who they see, who they work around, either in the past or currently. So if we look at any top rank at any agency, I can bet you money that they know each other from a past agency, have worked together, coming up the ranks, and there's a sense of respect or of knowing them, which allowed them to now be at that senior rank at this agency together. It happens all the time. And so what's the issue, right? Because of course, if I came up in the ranks with you, then I know that you can do the work and you're probably fantastic. The issue is that, which I spoke about a little earlier, is that when you talk about Black professionals being in this space, many times we don't have the relationships. And so that is a barrier for us, that if all of the seniors or people that we work with are white male, and we build relationships with people who look like us, then that means by that very nature, we're not building relationships with people who can help us in our careers. And so I think it is incumbent upon white males to also understand that this is happening. It's not solely on us to change that, right? But I do think that known talent pool is one of the biggest barriers that I've seen in multiple agencies that I've worked at, is they have a pool of candidates, but they're going to select the person that they have worked with or have a respect for from the past or who they work with currently. And they may be very good. I'm not saying that these are hires that they are making because they're a friend. These are very good people. But if you don't have those relationships built, then I think that you're not in the in crowd. You're not already in the in crowd. And that really affects us reaching the senior ranks, unfortunately. And I think it will continue to look that way. Right? I think it will continue to look that way until we actually break into the senior ranks and start that trifecta I just spoke about, which is mentoring, coaching, and sponsoring our own individuals into those senior ranks.
Dr. Creekmore.
Yeah. I would also add on that you know, when you look at the senior ranks for the IC, about 85% is overrepresented by non-minorities. So question is are we really making sure that those people that's overrepresented have an understanding of ethnicity, culture, and race? And what does that look like? Because, you know, two primary activities of the intelligence community is collection. So how we collect our data, whether that's human sources or technical sources, and then it's an analysis of the data. And a lot of time, as Ms. Schubert stated, you know, we're grouped in those places when they hire us, whether it's either enterprise, information technology, mission management, or management and support. And so we're outside of those major mission areas. And a lot of the senior leaders that you see, when you kind of look at their bios and you kind of look at their resumes and you talk to them, they were outside of those areas. But one of the things that that 85% representation in the senior, from my perspective, kind of lack is what's that understanding of culture? Right? Do you have a good understanding of culture? Do you have a good understanding of race and ethnicity, right? Peoplehood. And I think once we kind of tackle that, because at the end of the day, when you look at those two primary activities for the IC, it's people. And there's no way that the IC can accomplish its mission if we're not diverse, because we're around the world. So that was one of the issues with 9/11, and also one of the issues in being in Afghanistan, that the representation of the IC wasn't representative of the mission that we was focused on when it came to 9/11 and when it came to Afghanistan, and we saw that we had to change. So it's either we'll acknowledge that we have an issue and change, or we will be forced to change depending on the next mission that we have to face in front of us.
Thank you, Dr. Creekmore. That's actually a perfect segue into my next question, which I want to pose to you, Sean. Dr. Creekmore mentioned that, you know, that's the necessity of that rich diversity of culture, of background that helps keep us safe, right? That helps us tackle our nation's hardest problems. So, Sean, how has the inclusion of diverse perspectives and experiences improved our national security efforts?
I would say a workforce consisting of different backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences has a greater chance to offer a wider range of perspectives and to avoid intelligence surprises. We do not provide our best intelligence, the best information technology solutions, or mission enabling efforts when everyone thinks alike. Diverse talent is critical to addressing the wide array of challenges that we're facing as a nation. For many of the tough intelligence questions that we're asked to respond to, we need differing opinions and options, as the problems are dynamic and very multifaceted. We often need to consider every option available to address a complex issue, and diversity of thought and experience is vital to that. And while diversity has increased in many forms over the years, we have such a long way to go. We need to fix this issue at a much faster pace. We need Americans who are fluent in the various foreign languages, who have strong IT and technical backgrounds, those who are experts in human resources, financial management, contracting, et cetera. And we need to remain nimble given our no-fail mission. And we must also stay on top of cultural nuances and societal norms. During my time as Chief of Staff of the National Intelligence Council, I directly saw the benefits of diverse opinions and perspectives, to include differing agency perspectives, and also saw where we have gaps across the enterprise. And the equity and analysis work that's currently underway in the Biden-Harris administration shows a positive step toward improving policies in the mission space.
Thank you for that, Sean. You know, when you have individuals from the same background, same cultural background, it really creates an atmosphere of monolithic groupthink and trying to solve our nation's hardest problems. So thank you for that. So Kathy, I want you to come in here and see if you could provide some examples of instances where diversity has contributed positively to decision making in international affairs or intelligence operations.
Thank you. And this is an area where I've seen personally, and watching others and also experiences on my own, how diversity helps a great deal internationally, and in turn with our intelligence priorities. We have allies diplomats and academics and businessmen and women across the globe that do look like us, people of color. When we have those officers, the embassy leadership that are, as Sean said, have the hard languages, they speak the languages, they are, in some cases, native speakers in languages with our partners around the world, they're put at ease. The partners are excited that we're familiar with their priorities, that we understand their culture, and they actually reach out to those officers to gain more insight, to deepen relationships, because they want help with their issues. There have been cases where allies have asked to extend the tours of those officers even because they don't want to lose that partnership. So we've seen time and time again where officers who look like our allies and partners around the world pay off in spades. I'm sorry, bad word to use there, but the relationship pays off because they feel comfortable. They're excited to meet people who understand their priorities again, and then we extend and improve the relationships based on that camaraderie, the synergy that's used, and we pass that down to other officers. And those officers may not necessarily look like the ally, but we're explaining to our other junior officers that this is what they're interested in, and this is how we'll advance our relationship. So it's not a maybe, it's already worked, and it works well. Danger being, though, how many of those officers are at the 20, 30-year range, though? How do we ensure that those officers, that we bring up officers behind them, again, maintaining representation in our core mission areas?
Thank you for that, Kathy. I want to switch gears to recruiting and cultivating diverse talent. And I want to go back to you, Dr. Horn, because I know you wear many hats here and can touch upon this intimately. What challenges are commonly faced in recruiting diverse talent, and how can organizations address these particular challenges effectively?
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk about this, even in my current agency. First off, I think that diversity recruitment needs to be as important as recruitment. And I say that, and I'm not saying it to be funny, but when we talk about recruitment, diversity recruitment starts getting pushed to the corner, right? And it's like, oh, we're recruiting, we're doing a hiring surge, we need 1,000 people. But no one is saying, what is the diversity recruitment strategy as a part of a hiring surge, right? That comes far later, when my office has to come in and say, hey, we're doing a hiring surge, let me see where you're going to recruit. And then, my office gets to be the bad guy. Versus if we're in that conversation earlier, right? If we know a hiring surge is coming, that allows something like my office, leading the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity, an opportunity to work with HR to get a strategy together. And that way we see what areas of the organization, if they're hiring in a particular series, I can show them the demographics for that series and the locations on the map that we could potentially hit to have a really robust diversity recruitment strategy. So I say that, not to be facetious, but diversity recruitment needs to be as important as recruitment, right? So there's a lot of recruitment conversation, not a lot of diversity recruitment conversation. The next thing I would say is to speak the language, right? I think the federal government as a whole, has an issue tapping into the younger workforce and what's important to them. They don't truly understand how to recruit people that are in love with social media, that are in love with the 30-second soundbite, right? And so if we're still doing USA Jobs where we say, fill out this whole questionnaire and then do a particular resume a particular way, we're cutting out a large swath of potential candidates. right? So I think that's another area where we're not speaking the language of people that we're trying to bring on. We're staying the same and then asking them to shift into our program, which is not going to work because times have changed. I think also when we're talking about speaking the language, we also need to know the benefits of what we bring to that particular group, right? So one of the things that I shifted to see if this would make a difference is we were posting jobs again on USA Jobs, and I had an issue with that, but our HR was not ready to shift. And I said, okay, well, let's change some of the wording. Can we change some of the introduction where we start talking about the location, because we had an office in a location that we continuously had to put out because people did not want to work in that location. And I said, let's change the introduction and highlight all the wonderful things about this location. Oh, it's 30 minutes from this large metro area. You know, it's good family oriented area, great schools, yada, 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 right? Things that you don't see in USA Jobs right now. And I said, well, let's just change that and see if that gets more takers that are willing to go and live in a very white community, right? And so we did that. We changed some of the wording to really try to bring in a particular type of candidate, right? A candidate that cared about family would thrive in this particular location. A candidate with children would have loved that this location had really high schools, really high mark schools. And so by doing that, we did get more diverse candidates in that pool. And it was just by shifting the language into what is important to a particular group of people on why they would want to be in a location that on face value doesn't sound like a place that I would want to go to or be welcomed by, being a person of color, right? So these are the things when we're talking about how do we recruit diverse talent. It means sometimes changing ourselves, one, that being ready earlier, that diversity recruitment strategy, but then also speaking the language to get the community of folks interested in what we do. So I think those are the two things that I would say are challenges, but we can overcome it by doing things a little bit differently on the federal government side.
Dr. Horn, you mentioned, and I love this, you mentioned getting the community that you're trying to target interested in what you do, right? So many years ago, I used to do recruiting on the side for OD&I with my colleague, Sophia Lee. And one thing that we did really well, we targeted HBCUs, but you have to understand the culture of HBCUs. You just can't show up to a job fair, right? You need to cultivate the relationship and sustain that relationship. So what me and Sophia did when we were recruiting for OD&I, we reached out to the professors and got their permission to go inside the classroom, and we taught intelligence community 101, national security 101 modules 2 days before the job fair, right? And held resume workshops and held mock job interviews. And the return on investment was night and day versus just showing up at a job fair. You really have to really know the culture of the population that you're trying to target. I
will say too, though, really think outside the box on it, right? So it's not just going to an HBCU, right? If you're looking for high quality people who care about service, where would you go at an HBCU? You're going to the Divine Nine. These are people who care about service. That's why they're in a fraternity and a sorority. They're servicing their community already. So now they're speaking your language. And it's about tailoring what we do to a particular group. We can go to an HBCU and like you say, sit out at the table, but are you targeting people with like-minded values? And so just being a part of the federal government, that means that we have a higher calling. We're not doing this for the money, right? And so you need a group of people. If you're targeting people, target people with those same values that are doing it already themselves. If they're a part of a sorority or fraternity that's about servicing the community, that's speaking our language. That's an end that we can talk to them about.
Absolutely, I agree wholeheartedly. Sean, once diverse intelligence officers are hired, from your point of view, what strategies have worked in cultivating their career growth and ensuring a supportive work environment?
Charles, thank you for the question. I think it starts with building a strong network and creating a sense of community. For example, at OD&I, we have, I think we're up to 13 employee resource groups to include African Americans, veterans, women, Hispanic Americans, LGBTQ+, et cetera. And you know, within the ERGs, they promote organizational visibility, cultural and mission awareness, and create powerful networks. A couple other things that I think have been really popular at OD&I currently, D&I Avril Haynes, she started a D&I mentoring program where she is the mentor with 6-month cohorts with an emphasis on a diverse population. She also has off the record with the D&I sessions that are open to all IC officers, and also shadowing opportunities across the enterprise, you know, a day in the life of, you know, a certain director that a junior officer may want to follow have been successful. Also, I feel that conducting stay interviews with employees at the appropriate interval, whether it's twice a year or even quarterly. And for those who don't know, a stay interview is really the equivalent of a SWOT analysis, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to retaining an individual. Also, diverse officers want to see themselves and others in the senior leadership structure. So I think we should implement a promotion oversight board to ensure that we're meeting our goals there. Also, as mentioned earlier, we need to empower the future of work at greater scale. The majority of IC officers are unable to work from home. However, how do we enable them to work closer to home? For example, if you look at the DC metropolitan area, there's 4 corners of the Beltway. We should have adequate remote work locations and SCIFs in the 4 corners of the Beltway. And promotion statistics need to greatly increase for people of color. I've been in the IC for 20 years, and you know, we really haven't seen much progress. I've been very pleased with the increase of women representation in the senior leadership ranks at OD&I and across the IC over the past 3 years. However, we need to keep the same momentum going, especially with regards to people of color. And one last thing I'll mention, a number of barrier analyses and other reports on the lack of diversity in the senior ranks of the IC have been conducted over the past 20 years. Dozens of recommendations have been provided. You know, who is tracking the implementation of these recommendations and best practices? It appears that we frequently call for new studies to be conducted when we have a lot of existing recommendations that are all fairly similar. And I think an IC accountability mechanism, whether it's a board or a panel, you know, should be monitoring this space.
Thank you for that, Sean. It is 9:43. I want to get to the audience questions. We have about 60 questions, so let me apologize in advance to our virtual attendees. We will not be able to get to every single question. We could have an 8-hour conversation on this topic alone. But the first question I wanted to get from the audience, Sean, I want to throw it back to you because you just lightly touched upon it. How do we measure success? What does success even look like?
I think when this, not just the senior leadership team, but the senior ranks, to include the senior executive ranks and the GS15 ranks, really mirror the workforce, really mirror the country that we serve, then we would have met success. You know, I'm the type of person, you know, if I have a team of 50, I want someone from every state, from every background, you know, from, you know, I want a very diverse team. But also in measuring success, we have to hold our leadership accountable through various mechanisms. We need to set more specific goals, in my opinion, with regard to advancement within the workforce. And ultimately, as I said, when the senior leadership team is reflective of the workforce that it serves, I think that's one measure of success.
If you ask, they will tell you. That's all. That's how you measure success to me. If you ask, they will tell you. You know, if you don't care to hear about how you're doing as an agency or how the culture is to certain communities that work for you, then you'll never know. You can always opt out of knowing. But at the end of the day, I think Sean makes a very valid point, right? Seeing the people in those roles is a measure of success, but you know, not all skin folk are kinfolk. And they make it there and they shut the door behind them. But I also think that if you ask the people who work for you, right, that's when surveying, focus groups, sensing sessions, going out and talking to your people about why they want to leave. Sean brought up stay surveys. That's a prime way to know if you're being successful as an organization. If people are running out the door, you're probably not successful. But you know, I think a lot of it is assessing where you are, but then asking the question and not being afraid of the answer and doing something about it.
I could jump in there.
Oh, please, Kathy, yes.
It has been my experience that organizations do know where they stand. The hard part is how do they fix it? As Sean mentioned, there have been barrier analysis, surveys, studies, and we keep recreating the wheel, asking the same questions over and over again. And so hopefully we'll stop trying to figure out what the barriers are, because we know what they are. It's what do we do to fix those things? And so I'm praying that we'll get to the point, because we're starting to have more people walk out the door, not because they're dissatisfied with the mission. That's not it. It's they don't see themselves advancing. The other large problem is that some groups do not understand how to continue to motivate a type A personality that feels like they're stuck. So when you hire a person from a diverse background that has a doctorate and several languages and they're entrepreneurs on the side, and you want them to come into work and sit at a desk for 8 hours, there's a high probability that they're going to become bored and want to move on. Then you all, as all of you I'm sure are aware, contractors inside our buildings are wooing those same people that I'm speaking of with more money. So they have the opportunity possibly to maintain in the working space, to stay in the working space in the intelligence community with more money. So there's so many different layers and overlapping issues that organizations have to deal with. It's not that they're not aware, they are aware, but they haven't found that sweet spot. Just wanted to make sure that we added that in there.
Decided if they even want to do it, right, Kathy? They may know, but they may not want to do it.
Dr. Creekmore, you have I want to throw this next question at you from the audience. I'm going to blend two questions together here. Given your rich experience at IARPA dealing with performers in your current role at NGA, how do we engage talent from the corporate sector and bringing them into the IC?
I think Ms. Schubert kind of hit on it. Like if you're bringing them from the corporate sector, you have to compete. I think with that salary aspect. So sometimes the best way to bring people in is to make sure that you have unique and hard problems to where they're going to be able to be recognized for it. And you give them a platform and a stage to work. You just can't sit some people behind a desk and expect them to work a hard problem for you, and then you don't put them out in the forefront to be able to present to some of those senior leaders that oftentimes those outside of our demographic get to present to. You do the work, you coach them, and then they get to present. And some people want just to be recognized and just to be shown some type of appreciation just for the work that they're doing, and it doesn't matter about the pay. So I think the biggest thing to recruit those people from the corporate sector is to make sure that you're giving them unique problem sets while at the same time you're giving them that opportunity and that stage to be appreciated and to show what their talent can bring to the mission.
Thank you for that. So we've gotten maybe like 3 questions that are similar, and I'll try to simplify this. How do you find mentorship, and how do you approach certain individuals in seeking mentorship?
Oh, good one.
Uh,
I can tell you for me, LinkedIn works the best. I mean, I've found the majority of my mentees have reached out to me on LinkedIn because they've seen what I was doing and how I present myself. And they reached out and we had a call, had coffee, had lunch, and there the relationship goes, right? And every person that you reach out to is not the right fit. So some of it is like almost like a date where you're trying to see if it's a good fit for you, good fit for them. But just know that just reaching out is the first step. Just have that chat with them to see if they align with your values and what you're trying to do with your career, or your personalities match. People can be great technicians, great leaders, but if your personality does not match theirs, then you're probably not going to get a lot out of that mentor-mentee relationship. So for me, I say the easiest way, even if you're an introvert, LinkedIn works, where you can send a message. If it's somebody that you work with in person, you see them in the office and you're like, man, I'd really like to get to know them and see how they did, what they did to get to where they're at. Then I think also just getting on their calendar and asking for a 15-minute chat. And then you still have that same conversation to see if it gels when you tell them what you want to do with your career and why you reached out to them. So that's what I would offer up as a way to find a mentor.
One thing I would say, I think sometimes we miss, and I know I found it in the IC, for one of my colleagues, Dr. Joanna Arthur, is your peers and the people that's right next to you at the same level can also mentor you as well. So leverage that, because you're in the same space and you can bounce ideas off of each other. I've known Mr. Carruthers, right? We're in the same space. There's a network he has, there's a network that I have. And so we can benefit each other by leveraging each other's networks, understanding where each other are going in our careers, and providing those contacts to push people forward. So mentors don't necessarily, I think sometimes we always think a mentor always has to be above us in some type of capacity, but sometimes they're right next to us.
Yeah.
And just quickly,
Please, yes.
sometimes you won't be able to have a mentor who looks like you. My history has been that the same people are tapped over and over and over again with requests to be mentors, and they can't take on too many people because you're not as effective. So sometimes look for someone who has your energy, who matches your energy, or their energy attracts you. I've had very few mentors who look like me. I stayed in contact with people that look like me and get pointers from them. But often my mentors were people who saw something in me, and or I like their energy, or I like when I work with them. So after I stopped working for that person, I kept in contact with that person. So just food for thought there.
And thank you, Kathy. I want to echo Dr. Horn's statement on LinkedIn. I will never say no to a 15-minute conversation to anyone, young or older, who wants a career in the intelligence community. I think, as a former intelligence professor, I can't believe I'm still saying former now. As a former intelligence professional, I still have a duty to my country in cultivating the next generation of national security practitioners. So I'm not going to say no for a 15-minute conversation to anyone who wants to reach out to me about how to get their foot in the door. And speaking on getting your foot in the door, one of the questions, and I'm going to pose it to you, Kathy, and you, Dr. Horn, how do you stand out as being a woman who is trying to enter into the national security
Go ahead, Kathy.
The question is, how do you stand out as a
Yes.
woman? I've never been a shy person. And I think you don't have to try to answer every question or go after every opportunity to try to ensure that you're being heard. What I would do would be to concentrate on my strengths. Try to ensure that I am providing input where it makes sense to me, where I could add impact, because there's so many priorities in the IC. You can't address them all. So look for your niche, look for your strength and the area where you have the most, you can provide solid impact. I think starting there will help to show your commitment, your work ethic, and what you're willing to do to further the mission. Pass it over to Dr. Horn.
And I'll just piggyback on that. I think for me, what has worked is a couple of things. One, relationship building, right? I make sure that I am building relationships that are authentic, that I'm authentically myself. And so people know who I am at my core, and then they can trust that no matter where I am. And when I call to ask for a favor, 9 times out of 10, people are willing to help because they know that I stand behind my word and who I am. So building relationships is key because not only am I a woman, but I'm a Black woman, right? So I have 2 strikes against me many times. But I also think that I prepare myself, right? I prepare myself for every room that I walk in. I've been the only woman in a room as well as the only Black woman around the table. And even currently where I sit, I am one of 2. And so it is very important for me to show up in the space authentically myself, to shake things up just a little bit, right? Because I think the more that we assimilate to a particular culture or group is when we start losing sight of the importance of what we bring into that space. And so for me, that's what I would say, being a woman in this space and as a senior, I think it is important that we are authentically ourselves so that people can see that and know that, you know, you don't have to assimilate in order to become a senior.
Thank you for that. Thank you, panel. We are right at time. Thank you for this amazing conversation. I want to thank Sean Coates, Chief of Staff for Human Resource Management at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Dr. Tori Creekmore, Senior Cybersecurity Engineer with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Dr. Teresa Horn, Director of the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity at the Defense Counterintelligence Security Agency, and Kathy Suber, the now recently retired Democratic Budget Director for the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Thank you, panel. Thank you for this candid and amazing conversation. Again, my apologies for not getting to all the questions. I think this is just such a rich conversation, one that needs to take place consistently as we go throughout our days as intelligence professionals. I would like to pass the microphone back now to Bishop Garrison for some closing remarks. Bishop.
And thank you, Charles. You did a tremendous job in leading this incredibly talented group of leaders, and we are truly thankful for your words today. And thank you to all of you for joining us for this sensational panel and this very informative discussion. Special thanks again to our partners, Black Professionals in International Affairs, BPIA. And for all of you for watching online, thank you for taking the time out today to join us. When the webinar ends, there's going to be a short survey, so we really ask that you please take a few moments to complete it and let us know how we did. And with that, thank you. Happy Black History Month, and that concludes this morning's programming. Have a great day.